Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Nix. I'm head of content and research, and we've got a real treat for you today. We're actually doing something new. I'm recording this at the North American Manufacturing Excellence Summit in Fort Worth, Texas, and today we're going to be recording a speaker roundtable. So rather than me sitting down and speaking with one person, we've actually gathered several people from the speaker faculty at this event. And we've also gathered questions from all the attendees and then weighted them based on what we were getting the most submissions of. So I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. My guests today are Brandy Hebert from Estée Lauder Companies, Bill Good from GE Appliances, and Daryl Taylor from Airbus Americas. I think we've actually got a good stretch of time here and some fantastic content to cover. Let's get into it. I want to start off by talking about digital transformation. When we were gathering suggestions for this interview, we were asking every delegate to list business challenges, and a third of them said digital transformation is something that our organization is really working on. Some would even say struggling with. I think every manufacturer is somewhere in its digital transformation journey at this point, but there are going to be sticking points. There's going to be not hitting objectives on time. I wonder, based on your own experiences, if you could give some advice to senior leaders who are trying to troubleshoot or course correct or otherwise help their teams succeed and overcome some of these obstacles. Could we start with you, Brandy?
Awesome. So great question first, Jeff. I think I've seen two kinds of stalls in digital transformation. One is you put the solution in and it's not delivering the results that it's supposed to. And the second is capital constraints or funding constraints slow something down. I'd like to focus on the first, which is a stall associated with it's not delivering the results. What I've seen the most successful is what that usually means is we didn't quite get the design right. So we have to go back in and dig into what were we intending to solve as a team, and then rally kind of this cross-functional group together to say, let's get back to individual losses that are happening, what we were trying to fix, and the resolution plan, and get everybody on a path to the success. And then once you have that success in place and you're checking it and is then delivering those results, then we've had great success with then further adoption in the other sites. But stalls associated with something not delivering are usually that we didn't have the right people and processes locked down to actually unlock the value of digital transformation.
That's a very good point. As I was listening to you answer that question, we take a very similar approach. We pilot, we go small, make sure we master the tool and whatever digital tool we're attempting to use, and then we cascade it across the organization. We started in the four walls of our manufacturing plants, and I love that you said figure out the problem you're attempting to solve. That's our approach as well. We said, what's the problem with why our plants are not running at a high efficient rate, and why are we having downtime on assembly lines? So what we found is we lacked the data in the hands of the people who can solve the problems. So we started building out what we call Brilliant Factory. And to give visibility, not just visibility to me, but visibility to the folks who can solve the problems, and bring that visibility to their phone, to smart boards, whatever, be able to Pareto the problems out and go solve the problems. So we started there, and then we started working out from the nucleus of our manufacturing sites. We started working towards our supply base, to have visibility from components from our supply base. Then we started to our consumer and track and trace, so that we had end-to-end visibility.
Yeah, I agree. I think, what we've found is when we tend to run into failures, it's usually because we've designed a tool that isn't a solution. So we're deploying a tool and we've picked something that seems to be the right tool, but we haven't really thought through the solution that we're trying to solve, and that doesn't allow people maybe to adopt that. So once we've understood that failure mode, really starting to get back to, have we picked the right tool? Is it defined to support the right solution? Is the end user getting value out of this? Because usually we have a lot of digitally savvy people these days, but if the tool isn't giving them the solution they want, then they tend to just go back to the old way. So solution and making sure the tool matches is key.
That's absolutely true.
You know, I want to hit on one other thing. We talked about capital constraints and ROI on investment in digitization. You know, what we had to do is really set aside some discretionary spend that we allow ourselves off the hook on ROI so that we can pilot the actual digital tool. A prime example of that is 3D scanning. Being able to have virtual twins of our components, of our factory and everything. We could not come up with a good ROI on that. So, you know, we had some discretionary spend. We doubled down on it, and we started small. But once we had built out the capability, and we were able to then come up with a good ROI on all the problems it would solve, and then build it out across the network. So that's kind of our approach versus being as rigid on ROIs as you would in normal capital projects.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've seen that work as well. The idea of piloting a little bit of investment to create the value creation, because you can't always see all of the nuances of the savings and the decision making that come with the digital technologies. Yep.
I think what's also important is maybe a segregation between what you would call as maybe major roadmap type digital deployments, which are the enterprise-wide or the site-wide, and they yet absolutely will take 80%, 90% of the investment, but also breaking out a small percentage to allow local teams to adapt and take on small projects gets buy-in. And what we've tended to find is those tend to become the fuel then that allow the larger projects to take hold. So separating, what are those big corporate investments from small localized wins, I think is a key also, because you tend to get ROI quicker actually in the smaller ones. Yes. And that fuels the larger investment topics.
You get energy out of the smaller, you get the motivation, you get the digital, you get the transformation of the workforce.
Yes, I agree. You really get some inertia going when people get behind it.
You do.
I guess the next question I want to talk about in the digital transformation space is about automation. There's a lot of good that comes from it. I mean, it frees up workers to do other more important tasks. It gathers data from processes that until now have been analog. But there can be a natural reluctance from people to volunteer, oh, please automate part of my job. How do you overcome that culture of conservatism? And do you have examples from your own working life of there was an initial reluctance, we overcame it, and we actually made people start volunteering and advocating for further automation? I would love to hear your stories.
So I'll start out here. What we started out with were tasks that were dull, dirty, and difficult. So we just corralled it around those three principles. And those are jobs that people tended not to like anyway. I mean, if they were very difficult to do, that's when we were able to put 6-axis robots. So what we concentrate mostly on, when you think about from a lean perspective, having inventory and then moving that inventory from point A to point B are both wastes, right, within your system. So we started out with less focus on assembly operations, although we did put some automation in assembly operations, but anywhere where we were moving components, whether it's off of a press, from the press to a bin or a picking system of some sort, that's where we focused. If it took a lot of manual exertion, then we automated those tasks. And we also, it's very difficult when you're looking at ROI on a single robot, for example, to replace a job for the expense of the robot. We integrated much of our automation as we would do programs so that we could integrate. It's very difficult to take an existing old process and then automate it. But if you're building a new process, you can build the robotics into the new process. So as we transformed our facilities and we did programs and put in new assembly lines, we included a lot of robotics and automation.
I've seen the same thing. Like you can new platform, so a full new, let's white page the whole thing, and then it becomes really easy to do some of that
And it's a lot
automation.
easier.
And then when you're coming into this existing facility, best way I've seen it, honestly, Jeff, is you need to bring total employee involvement into a loss analysis or a value stream mapping or whatever the tool is in the company you work. And when the people can see that the hours and the time and the manual labor, as you said, lots of manual labor, and then you say, okay, we want you to be a part of that. And when you're a part of that, you're going to help us create that process. When you create that process, you're going to build your skills. And now you're no longer going to be doing this manual operation. Now you're going to be leading the team or leading the technology stream. And you're going to be qualifying this equipment and you're going to be running this equipment. And then they can see themselves grow. And then they get to see themselves grow in the company, as well as making sure that we do have the most effective, and we meet our goals for productivity and our goals for operations.
Look, in the aerospace industry, I very much agree. We're long life cycle, platforms as well. So a lot of manufacturing footprints are, already existing, not easy to instantly automate. So we have to make some of the smart decisions in terms of where will we invest. In terms of actual robotics, we're focusing on a lot of roles which aren't the nicest roles for our employees, which maybe create safety challenges or ergonomic challenges. And also, we're looking to focus on the reliability of that, so fuselage joins and things like that. And I think you get a lot of employee buy-in when you see two things. One, that you're making a role or a job that was difficult for them easier. And also that you're investing to upskill them. Because ultimately we don't see in Airbus that we're necessarily replacing employees. We're looking to use them for higher types of roles, higher type of engagement, higher value. And generally the employee will buy in on that. I would say, where we are in all honesty is we probably see far more automation in the digital side. So turning all of this data we talked about earlier into automated reports, automated information, better data decision making, which adds value into a lot of the support organizations, which makes our operations supervisors far more capable of taking care of their employees because they're not having to worry about digging through data. Some of the reports, some of the planning, some of the information becomes more and more automated for them to actually spend more time with their team and their operators. And now as we design our future factories and sort of retrofit some of the existing, as I said, we're looking at those jobs that would add the highest value from an employee point of view, not just from a corporate point of view.
You made some really good points there. When you think about ergonomics, a lot of our jobs, in our case, we're a century-old business and have been manufacturing appliances for the most part the same way for over 100 years. And as we have updated and transformed our facilities, we have focused on how do we protect our folks better. And we've been able to bring hard data like ergonomic data, injuries from repetitive motions to our associates and really get their buy-in on this is why you want to go along. And we're like, you all, we haven't had a situation where people are losing their jobs. They're just doing different type of work. And we have really good buy-in at the operator level.
Look, I think there's a reality as well that we can't find enough workers. I think
That's
we're probably
right.
all in that
right.
position. And what we're trying to do is identify opportunities where we can automate to relieve that tension. And obviously, again, bring employees in maybe at a different level in the organization to add further value. It makes them more engaged. I think we all see attrition at entry-level jobs or some of the manual roles a little higher than we do at an working around, let's say, the value-add roles. So again, as we invest, as we try to grow a workforce, what can we automate, and then what can we bring employees in at a different level to go support is key.
100%.
We actually did a huge program as COVID came, because we had people working side by side. And so we needed to automate the end-of-line technologies and the beginning-of-line technologies just to give people physical distance for that safety to prevent the spread of disease.
Well, I'll just add, I had a conversation back in September where someone said, technology doesn't replace people, it replaces tasks. And I think that's exactly what you just said.
Yep.
And I also had a great conversation with someone who said, most people in technical roles, they have a lot of school behind them, they have a lot of ambition, and they didn't get in it to do the entry level walking around with a clipboard, manually adjusting something. They want to rise through an organization and learn. So lots of opportunities there.
So really do, Jeff.
The last question I want to put to you in the digital transformation space is about data. Digital transformations run on data. A huge part of it is just an overwhelming cascade of information coming in from the industrial Internet of Things. It can be overwhelming, but obviously as leaders, you have to identify tracking the right metrics, getting it analyzed in time, having processes and teams in place that can actually work with this data. I'd be curious of your insights. What are some of the stumbling blocks to avoid? What are the best practices to make sure you're actually getting the data as you need it, where you need it, that it can be actioned upon? Let's talk about data. And I think, Daryl, this is the first time you were mentioning data in your last answer. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think the first key here is to be honest, is to take a look at what you're trying to collect. I think we have a tendency just to say, okay, we'll just collect, automate all of this analog data into something digital, and it overwhelms the system. So what we've tried to do is rationalize what we are going to digitalize, and really understand the end use, versus doing it the other way around, which is collect everything and then start to design a set of outputs. So again, it's about understanding the process, about understanding what data you think you need to run your business as best you can. Can't be perfect at that, clearly. And then really try to only start to digitize what is the right data, so that we don't overwhelm the organization and the system. If we miss something, it's easier to add than it is just to collect. So I think that's the approach we've taken and are continuing to take.
I think if I were to just kind of break down what we're attempting to get data for, I go back to one of the earlier questions around what problem we're trying to solve, right? So a lot of our data, we bucketize it in the form of, is it production related? So are we attempting to track downtime in our manufacturing plants? And what were the creators of the downtime? What did we have an operator pull their andon cord and stop the assembly line? And we can track, we have visibility to every single andon pull and how long that line stopped. So we want to make that visible to our leadership team and team leaders that can go understand the problem. Why did the associate pull the andon cord? Was there interference between the two parts going together or whatever? So that's one piece. Anything that would give us data behind why our assembly lines or why a stamping press is not running, we can collect all that and bucketize it in a form and Pareto that information out to be able to go solve the problem. Another bucket I would say is quality data. You have first pass yields, you have quality defects that either hit a repair bay or creates a disruption on your assembly line. So we bucketize that in a fashion. What was the event and what was the defect? So that not only can we track our KPIs, what was our first pass yield, but what were the defects that came into our repair bays so we can go solve that problem. And then the third bucket would be visibility. As we're moving components from suppliers to our manufacturing site or finished goods from our manufacturing sites to our consumers, having visibility where it is at all times so that we can plan accordingly and not disappoint our customers. But also, we use thousands of parts every single day, and those all have to hit at the right time. or you're going to have massive inventory. So having that visibility of when it's going to arrive at your plant. So those are really the three main buckets that we focused on.
I'd say I've experienced about the same ones. They're very common. And I think what you said is super cool about quality. And that when you think about something, you say, I want to work on batch quality, right? That's one of our big deals, is that we really want to work through that from a narrow artificial intelligence standpoint, so that the data is everywhere from what did the R&D team want it to be, what do my QA metrics need it to be, and what do my SAP release criteria need it to be. So there's just very narrow focus. And when you can do one stream really, really well, then you have the authority to say, I know how to do these process designs, and then I can continue into the others. Because if you try to do the everything, everywhere, all at once, well, then you're in the movie and the movies, and we're not in the movies, we're in production. So for me, that's super important, that very focused nature that you talked about.
100%. I mean, when we started, we had all of this data. It was massive, and it was overwhelming, and we just had to start with one piece. The one piece was, why do we have to shut an assembly line down? So we just focused on one piece. Then we focused on the quality data. So we had to bucketize it and really be hyper-focused on what problem we were trying to solve.
I think it goes back to a couple of the other questions, though, as well, right? Which is even around manufacturing and quality and supply chain. If you have data today that would require manual entry, versus you already having a way to digitize it with what's coming out of an ERP system, those things have become far easier. And we talked about buy-in earlier. If you ask just to collect data for the sake of collecting the data, that's when you don't get the buy-in.
Right.
So understanding the problem you're going to solve, understanding that's the data you need to collect. Hopefully it's already in some sort of digital form, which makes it easier. But asking for manual entries, manual collection of data that you never use,
it's double work.
Quickly
gets people not to buy into the process. So again, finding the right problem. Hopefully you've already got some level of digital, but if you have to manually it, don't just enter it, because I think then you do end up with a lot of digital data you don't need. You have to store it. Nobody ever understands why you collected it, and you got a lot of people that didn't buy in the first place.
I want to get to the next big issue that so many of our delegates were interested in talking about, which would be workforce and talent challenges. Now, this isn't new. It's been on every agenda NAMES has ever done, but it really feels like things have changed in the last couple of years. It's become much more prevalent. I wonder if we could start off by just sort of going around the table and saying how your organization has experienced the last few years with this period of higher turnover. I guess people are starting to call it the new normal of work is what we're in now, although we haven't quite decided what that is. Daryl, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get to speak tomorrow on two key pillars, to be honest, workforce and automation. So, very important topic for us as we continue to expand our facility in Mobile. I would say there's two things, elements, right? One is so far we've been very successful. We're a new facility, relatively new in the area. We tend to still get very good interest in terms of wanting to join our organization. The key challenge, though, is then the second part, which is how do you get the right talent in the right place at the right time? How do you get them the right skills? And how do you do that both at an entry level and also at a mid and senior level? One of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing is really building out a workforce pipeline. And I'm talking heavily now at the operations level. And we've done that by really engaging into the high school and actually below that, but into high school. And really creating an interest in manufacturing. I think this is one of the challenges that we see, is that I think we're quite ingrained into thinking about needing to go to 4-year schools and alike, and that's great. But we also need to make sure that people see that there's a great career, great opportunities in manufacturing. And we've done that by opening something called FlightWorks Alabama. It's an experience center on the doorstep. We've done that with coordination with our state partners as well as some other local educational partners. It really allows us to bring in middle school and high school students, give them a view of different STEM activities, give them an opportunity to actually come into our facility, allows them to come in with school counselors as well as parents. And I think once they come into the manufacturing facility and see that it's not what 1970s videos of manufacturing looks like, and they understand what the salaries can look like, then we get a lot of excitement. So then you have to take the excitement and harness it. And the way we've done that is really by developing partnerships with local colleges to trade schools, as well as creating an apprenticeship program. So I think we've seen a lot of success in the last 2 years with a lot of interest of high school, let's say through the end of college, of young adults wanting to join and be trained into the skill. We've probably had 10 to 1 the number of applicants to the roles, and so far seen very, very high retention, very high interest. And when you interview those kids, young adults, they talk a lot about what they want to do to develop further in the organization. So there's an excitement about being in manufacturing, but there's also an excitement about how do they take that first level of training and skills that we've given them, and turn it into being an automation engineer, or turn it into something else. And I think that's been a real success for us. So we've created an opportunity to excite the region, and then built on that with some sort of level of apprenticeship program. And we're also doing that into a graduate program as well.
What we have found, is we had some interesting dynamics that took place. I think we were seeing it before COVID hit. We were starting to see the baby boomers leave the workforce and Gen Xers, but when 2020 hit and we had the pandemic, we saw an acceleration of that departure in the workforce. And if you look at manufacturing jobs here in the U.S., the highest at its peak was post-World War II. And over the course of time, that's eroded as companies have made different decisions that fit their business model. And we've been down around 9-10% of jobs here in the U.S. being manufacturing jobs. So you've got manufacturing kind of started declining here in the U.S. You had a departure of baby boomers and Gen Xers at an accelerated rate. And then another dynamic that's taken place is many parents, and I will say I probably fall into this bucket, have been encouraging their children to go to college. And if you look at the amount of high schoolers who are attending college now, it's about 65%, and it varies from state to state. So you've got an increase of high school students going to college. So this population to do jobs in manufacturing plants has declined. And at the same time, what we're finding is the generation of worker that's entering into the workforce, the millennials, have a different value equation for themselves. They enjoy flexibility versus, the Gen Xers and baby boomers were just want to work 40 hours a week, overtime, as much time as I could. But what we're finding is the millennials value their flexible time, their time. They want to be more balanced. So what we had to do is we looked at the employee value proposition. And the employee value proposition is essentially, what are you going to pay me? What are you asking me to do for that pay? What is the environment that you're asking me to work in? And what's the culture like? How am I treated? And we have worked, all of those pillars of the employee value proposition and focused on, instead of making the person fit the work, Because for years it was, we have a 40-hour work week, it's manufacturing, it's a challenge, you're paid a premium, and but take it or leave it, and by the way, you're going to work some overtime when you're here. And we really changed our approach, and we had a lot of paradigms. You know, we that's the way it was. We just said, you know what, we have manufacturing jobs, we're going to pay you a premium over retail and food services. And the job is what it is, take it or leave it. And what we found is a lot of folks are leaving it. And manufacturing had lost a little bit of its luster, you know, from the baby boomer generation down to this generation. So we've had to rekindle the spirit around manufacturing. And so we started focusing on making the work fit the person versus the person fit the work. And how can we make work flexible? Forever, our line supervisor said, you got to be here every day, you have to be here on time, you have to be here 40 hours a week, and so forth. So we started out with having a part-time, you know, workforce. Our peak vacation times are Fridays and Mondays. So we said, can we get a Friday, Monday crew to come in? And we targeted college students who wanted part-time work. To our surprise, it was wildly popular with folks, parents staying at home that just wanted to work a couple of days a week. So they were willing to come work on a Friday, Monday. And our line supervisors didn't like it. They said, how in the world, we'll never get them here. It'll be difficult to train. And we just wanted to debunk the myths that we could not train folks and they could not be efficient 2 days a week. And they tend to be the folks who come to work every day. They have low turnover, and it's been super successful. Another program we did was My Work Choice. And My Work Choice is basically an app that a person can sign up for whatever shifts available. They have to sign up for at least one shift per week, and they can sign up for as many as they want. Well, one day they may want to work first shift, and another day they may want to work second shift. And we targeted a population that were retirees that again wanted flexibility. We're finding these folks high retention, low absenteeism, and again we had the myth that if a person doesn't work every single day, they will not be as proficient as a person that works 40 hours a week. And what we're finding is that's just simply not the case. So we attempted to just, you know, break all the paradigms and look and target populations that were sitting out of the workforce and make programs specific for them. You know, another area was immigrants. We targeted folks that may not be able to speak English forever. We said you had to be able to speak and write and comprehend English on the manufacturing floor. We had a lot of really good reasons why. And that was a population that we found to be super dedicated. They come to work every day, high retention. And we just had to debunk the myth that if you can't read or write English, that you couldn't adequately perform on the manufacturing floor in a safe manner. And so we are facilitating many languages in our plants today that we would never have gone after in the past.
That warms my heart. I just think of like what an amazing transformation. And I think as you talked about it, there's different solutions for different sets, right?
That's right.
There's like the retiree who still wants to contribute to society and giving them these sign up or not a full day, 5-6 hours, right? The parents that want to drop their kids off and pick them up. Like those are agile work schedules that I've seen also be very, very helpful for how do we work on retention and how do we augment the certain roles. And then on the side of like longer term and how to retain, it's exactly like you said, we have to retain and start in the local community, being present and being seen as a leader in a long-term career where they can come in and grow to their potential and see those roles in the organization, that they can be the line leader and up to the plant manager, or they can go and do technology development. Many of them don't want to do. I've seen those be really successful in how we retain the workforce and trying to give them that flexibility. And then I have also seen some of the work 1 day from week from home. And that gives people some of the flexibility that they think they want as well. So lots of good programs out there.
Yes.
I want to talk about supply chain issues. It's a very popular topic with our delegates. It does feel like we're living in an era of increased supply chain disruption, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon. And large organizations are adjusting their plans and their processes to be more resilient and agile. I wonder if you could speak about some of your own experiences in that space. Why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. It's two very relevant right now. We talk about it in all of our town halls and all of our strategy discussions. And what we're focused on is two things. One, which is regionalization, like bringing things as close as possible to where they are being sold. And then the second is duplication. So we actually make sure we have two sites that can source a specific item. That allows us to have flexibility and resilience in terms of how we deliver things to the supply chain, and gives us a little bit more of the buffer that's needed to meet the overall demand. So those are our two big strategies we focus on.
I would say we have done at GE Appliances something very similar. I mean, we have regionalized as well. I mean, we've increased the number of US-based suppliers by 50% over the past few years. And we believe that that has helped reduce the turbulence within supply chain. Another piece we have focused on is the digitization, from our supplier to us, to have visibility, complete visibility of what is, whether it's from Asia and on the water, or to be able to have complete visibility to all of the actual components, what's shipped, what's on the water, what's in port, what's, awaiting being processed through customs. So having that level of visibility has helped tremendously. We also have looked at where we had single source agreements with our supply base to have dual sources to reduce, our turbulence and supply chain as well, and to be able to flex between the suppliers. If one is struggling getting raw materials or with manufacturing issues, being able to flex some of that volume to the other suppliers helped tremendously. We've also looked at our port strategy. Everything, we were bringing everything in on the West Coast, and what we're finding were the delays through customs, and so we moved to a more balanced approach. We bring a fair amount to the East Coast now through Savannah. It may seem counterintuitive that you're going through the Panama Canal and it's going to be longer on the water, but what we found by the time that we reduced our freight through Seattle and LA, that you had that delay plus coming across the U.S. to the eastern side of the U.S. by bringing it into Savannah, then we were able to control the supply chain a lot better.
In Airbus and certainly in the aerospace supply chain, it's not easy to quickly create a second source if it doesn't already exist. Obviously, high level of capital investment. So what we found ourselves doing is really that watchtower, that visibility is key. I think where we've heavily trusted our tier ones to be the primary interface, we've seen that that's not sufficient. And certainly we need to understand the tier 2, 3, and 4 in some cases. So, that digital link, as Bill said, and really get a much deeper view of where things could go wrong, building a stronger and deeper set of resources that are close to the suppliers. Again, not always easy to bring a very global supply chain in aerospace close to each one of the assembly plants. So again, what that's really meant for us is deploying more and more resources out into our supply base close to not only the tier 1s, but tier 2, 3s, and 4s in some cases, and really getting a much deeper granularity in seeing the problems coming, so that we can either solve them earlier or adjust our manufacturing side of it to offset. That's meant that we've also built more resilience, more surge capability into our manufacturing as well. So recognizing the number one thing to do is try to solve the supply chain issue before it arrives. However, if you can get better visibility earlier, then you can adjust as long as you build that surge and that resilience mindset into your manufacturing processes. Because ultimately the goal is to get it to our customer on time. They really don't care if we have to make some adjustments internally, and I think we've been successful now being able to accommodate some of these challenges as we see them going through the overall supply chain.
You know, I would also say that, you know, I hate to keep going back to the pandemic, but the pandemic drove in some consumer goods a tremendous spike in demand for especially things like appliances, electronics. People were buying at rates that we had not seen before. I mean, they were people who were at home were ordering, you know, off of Amazon and just shopping the internet and so forth. It drove a tremendous spike in consumer goods. And what we found is in our manufacturing sites, is in supply chains, is a vulnerability. It was like nothing we had seen before. And in a lot of ways, it's actually been good for us in the long run, because it made us take a very hard look at our supply chains. Because the last thing that a supply chain leader wants to do is let their company down because of not being able to get their raw materials and get the product manufactured. So it's made us better, I believe, across industries. It made us really see the vulnerabilities that we have on where components are located, your sourcing strategy, how you're delivering the freight, your visibility of that freight, and so forth. So I think that we come out the other end as better manufacturers, better supply chains as a result.
100%. Increases our resilience and allows us to do
100%.
this strategic planning that
That's
really says what is the length of our supply chain and what's the agility that we can actually manage.
Agreed.
As I'm listening to all of your answers, the piece that keeps coming to my mind is inventory management. It does feel like there has been a shift in philosophy among manufacturers, where once upon a time, inventory was a dirty word and you only wanted just what you needed that day to do your process. And a lot of resiliency and agility does involve having a few more parts on hand or coming your way through the supply chain than was the case in the past. Has that been your experience? Is your company adjusting what it thinks in terms of inventory? And I should mention this was submitted by the delegates as well. I'm not just riffing here. We almost made a separate category of questions for inventory. It came up so often.
I think you're absolutely right. As we talked a little bit about in the last question, you know, our visibility, our need to get better visibility requires, in some cases, visibility is inventory. So it's not just a case of, you know, adding, 10 times what we had before onto the shelf, because that doesn't actually help, because the supply chain's struggling to make it anyway. So I think it's about making sure that you have the right inventory strategy, that you do create that buffer, that surge, but the right level of it, and to understand what you can live with and what you can't live with or can't live without. And what we've started to see is strategically, at Airbus, we have multiple manufacturing sites, so we can offset each other, either by storing inventory in a couple of the key locations, and or when we see a specific disruption, offsetting manufacturing slightly in one location than the other. So again, for me, it's not just about adding inventory for the sake of it, because the supply chain can't just produce more widgets, otherwise we wouldn't need inventory in the first place. But it is about being able to locate the right inventory in the right places, and having a full end-to-end view of where we have inventory at a supplier, inventory in the logistics and being able to accelerate it, or inventory in the manufacturing footprint. And then I think the most important piece is also looking after that inventory. So really having highly visible warehouse management systems, and also shop floor control systems, which are helping us make sure that we don't not necessarily lose in ultimate terms, but lose visibility of where that inventory is.
So I work in CPG, right? Prestige cosmetics. So I have both inventory that I need to focus on from the raw material side, as well as the end of life because of expiry, right? So with the pandemic, our focus on inventory has become wildly critical in terms of how do we drive more end-to-end synchronization of demand, and how do we learn more about demand and create modeling tools for setting the right inventory coming into manufacturing, and then providing enough inventory to our shelves, which can be extraordinarily dynamic. And I think this is where digitization is really coming into play as we build out the models and the tools that help us update our policies, update our negotiations and our contracts. Super important that I'm so glad to hear that everybody asked that question. And I think everybody's solving it all at the same time of how do we dig into better and stronger models that really work on lean, everyday matters, to when I put an order to what I need to get out the door so that I have the best, freshest product on the shelf.
You know, I have been pretty reluctant in just adding a bunch of raw material inventory, honestly. I really break it down to, again, what problem are we trying to solve? The reason you have or want the component inventory in excess of what you're pulling every day is because of this turbulence, because of lack of reliability. So where you do not have reliability between your component source and yourself, then that's where you've got to put in some safety stock. So we've looked for countermeasures on how do you solve that low reliability. Is it because freight disruption? Is it because their turbulence within their manufacturing site? And by having a dual source strategy versus single source strategy on components, that has allowed us to be able to flex between suppliers better and not have to increase safety stocks as much. We have safety stocks just to protect our manufacturing sites. We did before the pandemic, we have them now. I've been reluctant to make them higher, but look for the reasons why we would want more and go solve those problems. So we've also focused on our products themselves, the product architecture, and things that call it the guts of the product that the consumer does not necessarily touch or see or interface with. We want those components to be as common as possible across all of our platforms. And then we have late point differentiation to where you're going to have differences in that product through the consumer touch points and interfaces and the features they want. So by focusing on that product architecture and minimizing the variation between your actual platform and put all the variation in the consumer touch points, that's allowed us to mitigate a lot of the component difficulties. And then also a segmentation strategy. So when you have components, those ones that are part of the core platform, you're going to have one strategy for components that go on every single platform. Those are flowing real time, very fast flowing, and you're going to have one warehousing strategy for those components. But those highly differentiated components, those interface components with your customer, you have to have a very different warehousing strategy. That's where if you're going to have safety stock, you want to buffer yourself on those components because there's high variation. Where you have high variation, you're going to have turbulence on because you still have a forecasting model. You're forecasting what the consumer is going to pull. So where you have to put that buffer stock really is focus it on the differentiated components versus the platform components. That's the way we look at it.
You know, as we come up on the end of this roundtable, I want to talk a little bit about culture. And, you know, sometimes we call it lean or operational excellence or culture of continuous improvement, or just our workforce culture or our quality culture or our safety culture. And I think when we've been talking about this time of disruption and high turnover, you know, some organizations are saying they're getting through this because of their culture, and others are saying we're struggling to hold on to our culture while people are coming and going and we're training new people and we're trying to hold on to institutional knowledge. I wonder if you could speak to your organization's experience with it and what advice you might have for other executives who are listening to this who are struggling, or maybe not struggling. Maybe they're experiencing, you know, a great renaissance of the culture is what's saving the company. But I think it is on everyone's mind right now. How are we getting through this as an organization and as a team? And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'll jump in. You know, we're doubling down on our lean culture. You know, we have been practicing, you know, practitioners of lean methodologies, and specifically what we've learned over the years from Toyota on how we manufacture products. And you know, I'm an evangelist when it comes to lean. I've been practicing it for roughly 25 years, and you know, I've watched, you know, very difficult times in transformations, and I would say during the pandemic, during the last few years, I would venture to say it was our lean culture that got us through and allowed us to grow at an accelerated rate during that period. When you think about lean, it really comes down to, you know, the core of lean is standardized work. And how can you argue with all standardized work is the best way to do a job as you know it today, right? It's the most efficient, it's going to provide the most high quality, you know, output, and it's going to protect the operator. So you standardize to whatever the best way to do that role is, across shifts, across, you know, platforms, lines, and so forth. So we've kept that as the nucleus of what we're attempting to do, and everything flows out from that. How you solve problems one by one. You know, how do you balance assembly lines through Yamazumi charts? So all of the work that we have done and built out in the culture over the past several years, we have maintained, and I would argue, had it not been for lean transformation and strong culture around lean and operational excellence, we would have had a very difficult time surviving the last 2 to 3 years because of the turbulence in supply chain, the turbulence during the pandemic, and so forth.
Look, we're on a similar journey at Airbus. Again, the fundamental is our operating system, and that is certainly repeatable and seen in every one of our global facilities. It's the language that we talk about in terms of defining the way that we're going to manufacture the aircraft to all the way into the supply chain and ultimately into the customer's hands. I think in the middle of that, we've really created, and COVID, I think, reinforced this for us, and we have a very clear direction from our CEO that safety, which is the key pillar in everything we do, is the middle of that focus. So I think that's allowed us to not only maintain, but really build out our operational culture during COVID. I think when we were able to get on to phone calls and G meets across the world and have a similar language around the things that we were going to focus on to make sure that we could sustain our business in a time when, honestly, at one stage, I think 5% of the passengers were actually flying on the aircraft, and you were focusing on what that would look like and what did that do to the supply chain. The operating system was the way that we got our way through that. We really used that also as an opportunity to accelerate in some cases where our maturity was, to make sure that we had a consistency. And I think that allowed everyone to speak the same language. So I think on an operations point of view, that's one way. And then I think the second is we're very strong on our values. So we're really driving the values journey inside the Airbus organization. So between the operating excellence, our production system and our values, those two bedrocks really underpin the culture. And we bring employees in. We talked about developing workforce. We teach that those two things from the day that we bring employees in, and try to make that our language.
Awesome. That's cool. I think Estee Lauder is going to be a little bit different, right? High growth period of time, and actually a culture built on agility and dynamics. So that in terms of from a COVID standpoint and from a recent supply chain hiccups is part of the way they work, is pivoting to, is it makeup, or pivoting it to, is it skincare? So that ability to flex and be very agile is something that's within the culture of Estee Lauder, and so the team naturally progresses towards that. But I think, much like you said, the actual adder that we've taken in is actually more of the lean and the segmentation. Like, we've really started to double down on lean and segmentation, because before we just needed to be agile, and now we're seeing that we now have some of this in the continued large growth. Now we can be more lean, we can segment, and then we get a bit of a beauty of both. Some nice high runners, we get really good productivity, and then we have also the agility that is part of the business model. So we've seen that culture is just so key to any company's progression through the COVID and through the scenarios.
No, that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, what a great note to wrap up a great conversation on. I feel like we could be having this conversation for another hour or two, but I do want to be respectful of your time and let you get back to the event. But Brandy, Bill, Daryl, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.